Hey everyone and welcome. Today we are jumping into one of the most powerful and honestly one of the most confusing processes in American democracy, congressional redistricting. We're going to break down how the very map of our country's politics gets drawn. So let's get right into it.
Have you ever just looked at a political map and thought, what is going on here? Why is that district shaped like a salamander or a super long skinny noodle? Well, believe it or not, there's a method to the madness, and it all comes down to the rules of the game.
So what is congressional redistricting really? Well, at its most basic, it's just drawing the lines. Every 10 years, right after the new census data comes out, states have to redraw the boundaries for their U.S. House districts. It's basically like hitting a giant reset button on our political geography to match where people actually live.
Now, you can't just draw these lines wherever you feel like. There are rules. And the whole point of having all these criteria is to try and make sure the maps are fair. The goal is to prevent the boundaries from being totally random or, even worse, drawn in a way that's discriminatory. So, where do we even start? Well, we start at the top. There are two, let's call them golden rules, that every single state has to follow. No exceptions. These are the federal mandates that are the absolute foundation for every single congressional map in the U.S.
And here they are. First up, population equality. This just means every district in a state has to have pretty much the same number of people living in it. And second, minority protections. You can't draw the lines in a way that waters down the voting power of minority groups. So let's dig into each of those a little bit more.
The first rule really boils down to this incredibly powerful idea: one person, one vote. The Supreme Court has made it crystal clear that your vote shouldn't be worth more or less than someone else's just because of the district you happen to live in. This whole rule is designed to prevent something called malapportionment.
And that second golden rule, it comes straight from a really important piece of federal law, the Voting Rights Act. And its job is simple: to make sure states can't draw maps that deliberately dilute the voting strength of racial or language minorities. It's a crucial backstop.
Okay, so once a state has satisfied those two big federal requirements, things start to get, well, a lot more interesting. Because now we move down to the state level, where the map makers themselves get a whole menu of other criteria to choose from.
And what's fascinating is that while states have choices, you can see that some rules are way more popular than others. I mean, look at this chart. You've got a big chunk of states, 33 of them, saying their districts have to be contiguous, and almost as many say they need to be compact. Continuity is probably the easiest one to wrap your head around. It just means the whole district has to be one single connected piece of land. No weird separate islands. You should be able to get from any point in the district to any other point without ever crossing into a different district.
Compactness, on the other hand, is a little fuzzier. The general idea is to avoid those really strange, sprawling shapes we were talking about. You want districts to be more, consolidated. But here's the catch. Most states don't actually give a mathematical definition for what counts as compact, so it can be pretty subjective.
Now for a concept that's a bit more nuanced: keeping communities of interest together. This means trying not to split up groups of people who have common bonds and shared legislative concerns. Maybe it's a neighborhood or people who work in the same industry. The idea is to give that community a better chance to elect a representative who actually understands their issues.
All right, so we've got the federal rules, we've got the state criteria, but we haven't talked about the elephant in the room. And that, of course, is politics. This is where things can get really, really contentious, because it all comes down to who holds the pen when the lines are being drawn. And that brings us to the word you've definitely heard before: gerrymandering. This is when the map drawing process is used intentionally to give one political party a structural advantage over the other. You're basically trying to engineer an election's outcome before a single vote is even cast.
And this right here really gets to the heart of the national debate. You have a group of states that flat out ban using partisan data. They're trying to take the politics out of it. But then you have another group of states that says, hey, this is an inherently political process. Of course you can use partisan data. It's a fundamental disagreement.
And you see a really similar split when it comes to protecting the politicians who are already in office. Some states say, nope, you absolutely cannot draw a line to help an incumbent keep their job. And other states say, that's totally fair game, and you can even draw maps specifically to keep a representative's district mostly the same.
So when you put all of this together, the rules, the choices, the politics, it leads us to the central puzzle of redistricting today. We have more data and better technology than ever before, but we're still wrestling with that same basic question: what does a fair map actually look like?
And it's important to remember, this isn't some new fight. If you look at this timeline, you can see that Congress actually used to have more national rules for things like contiguity and population equality.
But for most of the last 100 years, those requirements went away, and the debate shifted to the states. And that argument is still happening in Washington today.
And that brings us to the great paradox of the modern era. Right now, we have incredibly powerful computer software that can draw maps with pinpoint accuracy. We can literally generate thousands of different map options in seconds, all of them perfectly legal and following the basic rules.
But, and this is the big but, all that technology hasn't actually solved the problem. As the Congressional Research Service puts it, technology hasn't given us a final answer. At the end of the day, a computer can't tell you what's fair. It can't tell you which values we should prioritize. That's still a human decision.
Which leaves us with the ultimate question, doesn't it? If a computer can spit out 1,000,000 perfectly legal maps, how on earth do we choose the right one? How do we decide which one is truly fair? That isn't a technical problem. It's a question about what we think democracy should actually be. And that's the puzzle that we're all still trying to solve.